The first thing Eliza Crow learned about survival was that dignity had a price, and in a town like Coldridge, that price changed every day. She'd arrived 3 months ago with nothing but a worn leather satchel, a faded photograph of her mother, and the jagged weight of responsibility pressing into her spine like a miner's pickaxe. Her mother had died in the spring, coughing blood into a rag she refused to let anyone wash. By summer, the debts had piled so high that Eliza's younger siblings, 2 boys, 9 and 11, had been sent east to live with an aunt who barely knew their names. The only thing left for Eliza was a one-way stagecoach ticket west and a scribbled address for a place that called itself a boarding house. It wasn't. Mrs. Garvin's establishment sat at the muddy end of Coldridge's main street, wedged between a saloon and a butcher shop that reeked of old blood. The building itself was 2 stories of sagging timber and peeling paint, its windows covered in tattered lace that did nothing to hide what went on inside. The sign above the door read, "Rooms for rent," but everyone in town knew what it really meant. Eliza had known too, the moment she'd stepped inside. "You'll work the kitchen first," Mrs. Garvin had said, eyeing her up and down with the cold calculation of a horse trader. She was a broad-shouldered woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a bun so tight it seemed to stretch her face. "Keep your head down, do what you're told, and we'll see about keeping you fed." That had been the deal. Food, a cot in the attic, and enough pay to send a few dollars east every month. Eliza had swallowed her pride, nodded, and picked up the first stack of dirty plates. 3 months later, she was still scrubbing. The kitchen was a narrow, sweltering cave that smelled of lard and burnt coffee. The stove belched smoke no matter how carefully she tended it, and the water from the pump out back ran rust-brown half the time. Eliza worked from before dawn until well past midnight, her hands cracked and raw, her back aching from carrying trays up the narrow staircase to rooms she tried not to think about. The women who lived upstairs didn't speak to her much. They moved through the house like ghosts, their faces painted and tired, their laughter sharp and brittle. Some were kind in their own silent way, a nod in the hallway, an extra biscuit left on the counter. Others looked at her with something close to pity, as if they could see the invisible line she was walking and knew how easy it would be to slip. Eliza kept her distance. She kept her head down. She kept moving. Because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant feeling the full weight of what she'd lost. Her mother's voice, her brother's laughter, the small house they'd shared, drafty and cramped but theirs, the life she'd thought she'd have, ordinary, unremarkable, safe. All of it gone. It was a Tuesday morning when she first saw him. She'd been hauling a bucket of wash water out to the alley when a horse and rider appeared at the far end of the street, moving slow and easy through the chaos of Coldridge's morning rush. The town was always loud, hammers ringing, mule teams braying, men shouting over card games and claims, but something about the way this man sat his saddle made the noise feel distant. He was tall, lean in the way of men who spent more time working than eating. Dark hair, dark eyes, skin sun-browned and weathered. He wore a battered hat pulled low, a dusty coat that had seen better years, and a bandana knotted loose around his throat. Nothing about him stood out, and yet Eliza found herself watching. Maybe it was the way he didn't look at anyone, didn't nod, didn't smile, didn't acknowledge the stares that followed him down the street. He rode like a man who'd learned long ago that being invisible was safer than being seen. She knew that feeling. The rider dismounted outside the land office, looped his reins around the post, and disappeared inside. Eliza turned back to her work, shaking her head at her own foolishness. Men came and went in Coldridge every day, drifters, miners, ranch hands looking for work. There was no reason to give this one a second thought, except she did. His name, she learned later, was Rafe Navarro. She didn't learn it from him. She learned it from Mrs. Garvin, who'd come into the kitchen that afternoon with a smug expression and a new piece of gossip to chew on. "You see that half-breed who rode in this morning?" she'd said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Navarro's boy. His father was that bandit they hanged up in Colorado 5 years back. Mateo Navarro. Killed 3 lawmen and robbed a army payroll. They say the son's just as wild, but he keeps his head down. Works at the Stockwell Ranch now, mucking stalls and mending fences. Quiet type. Probably dangerous." Eliza had kept scrubbing the pot in her hands, her face carefully blank. Mrs. Garvin had sniffed. "You stay clear of men like that, girl. They bring nothing but trouble." But trouble, Eliza was learning, had a way of finding you whether you invited it or not. She saw him again 2 days later. It was late afternoon and she had been sent to the general store to pick up flour and salt. The streets were thick with mud from the previous night's rain, and she picked her way carefully along the boardwalk, her skirt hem already filthy. The store was crowded, miners restocking for the week, ranch wives haggling over fabric, children darting underfoot. Eliza kept to the edges, waiting her turn. That's when she felt it, a prickling awareness at the back of her neck, the kind that made her turn before she'd consciously decided to. He was standing near the door, one shoulder braced against the frame, watching the street. His hat was in his hands, and in the dim light of the store, she could see his face more clearly. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw shadowed with stubble, eyes dark and unreadable. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that came from a long day's work, but the deeper kind. Bone deep, soul deep, the kind that didn't fade with sleep. Their eyes met for half a second, maybe less. Then he looked away, pushed off the doorframe, and walked out. Eliza stood frozen, her heart beating faster than it should have. She didn't know why, didn't understand the sudden tightness in her chest, the strange pull she'd felt in that brief, wordless exchange. She forced herself to move, paid for the flour, walked back to the boarding house, went back to work. But that night, lying on her narrow cot in the attic, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her, or rather, the way he'd looked away, as if he'd seen something in her face he recognized. Something broken. The town of Coldridge existed because of gold. It had sprung up almost overnight, a chaotic sprawl of tents and shacks, and hastily built storefronts clinging to the edge of a canyon where the river ran cold and fast. Men poured in from every direction, farmers, soldiers, criminals, dreamers, all chasing the same glittering promise. Some struck it rich. Most didn't. But the town kept growing anyway, fed by hope and greed and the kind of reckless energy that came from having nothing left to lose. By the time Eliza arrived, Coldridge had settled into a rough kind of order. There were saloons and gambling halls, a church that no one attended, a school that met in the back of the dry goods store. There was a marshal, though he spent most of his time drunk. There was a doctor who'd lost his license back east. There was a newspaper that printed lies as often as truth. And there was power. Real power didn't come from gold, Eliza learned. It came from owning the land where gold was found, from controlling the water rights, the supply routes, the men who did the digging. It came from knowing who owed what to whom and how to collect. In Coldridge, that power had a name, Victor Willard. He owned half the town outright and held mortgages on most of the rest. He'd arrived early, bought cheap, and built an empire on the backs of desperate men. His house sat on the hill overlooking the canyon, a sprawling wood and stone monument to ambition. He dressed like an Eastern gentleman, spoke with a smooth, educated drawl, and smiled with teeth that had never known hunger. People feared him. People respected him. People did what he wanted, because refusing meant losing everything. Eliza had seen him exactly once, riding through town in a polished black carriage, his expression pleasant and distant, as if the mud and chaos around him were simply beneath his notice. She'd thought, in that moment, that he looked like a man who'd never been told no in his life. She'd been right. It was a Sunday when everything started to shift. Mrs. Garvin had sent her to the butcher for a side of pork, and Eliza had been standing at the counter counting out coins when the door slammed open hard enough to rattle the jars on the shelves. 3 men stumbled in, loud and reeking of whiskey. Miners, by the look of them, dirty, unshaven, eyes red-rimmed and mean. The butcher's face went tight, but he didn't say anything, didn't have to. Men like that made their own rules. One of them noticed Eliza. "Well, well," he drawled, leaning against the counter with a grin that showed too many missing teeth. "What's a pretty thing like you doing in a place like this?" Eliza kept her eyes down. "Just picking up an order, sir." "Sir?" the man repeated, laughing. He looked back at his friends. "You hear that? She called me sir." He turned back to her, his grin widening. "You work at Garvin's, don't you? I seen you there. You serve drinks upstairs yet, or you still just scrubbing pots?" Her stomach twisted. "I work the kitchen." "For now," another man said, and they all laughed. The butcher cleared his throat. "Your order's ready, miss. Best be on your way." Eliza reached for the wrapped parcel, but the first man's hand shot out, blocking her. "Hold on now. Ain't polite to run off so quick. Maybe you could sit with us a spell. Have a drink." "I can't," Eliza said quietly. "I need to get back." "Aw, come on." She said no. The voice came from the doorway. Everyone turned. Rafe Navarro stood just inside the shop, his hat still on, his expression calm and unreadable. He didn't look at Eliza, didn't look at the butcher. He looked directly at the man blocking her path, and though his voice had been quiet, there was something in it that made the room go still. The miner straightened, his grin fading. "This ain't your business, half-breed." "It is now," Rafe said evenly. For a long, dangerous moment, no one moved. Then the miner spat on the floor, shoved past Rafe, and stalked out, his friends trailing after him like dogs. The door swung shut. Eliza let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking. She grabbed the parcel, fumbled her coins onto the counter, and turned to leave. "You all right?" She stopped, looked up. Rafe was still standing by the door, his dark eyes steady on hers. Not leering, not pitying, just looking, like he was giving her the chance to answer honestly. "I'm fine," Eliza said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Thank you." He nodded once, stepped aside to let her pass. She walked out into the sunlight, her heart hammering, the weight of the pork heavy in her arms. Behind her, the door closed quietly. What? That night, lying in the attic, Eliza couldn't sleep. She kept seeing his face, kept hearing his voice. She said no. No one had done that before. No one had stepped in. No one had cared. She didn't know what to do with that. The weeks that followed were strange. She didn't see Rafe again, not up close, but she became aware of him in a way she hadn't been before. She'd catch glimpses of him riding through town, or unloading supplies at the livery, or standing quiet and watchful at the edge of a crowd. He never looked her way, never acknowledged her. But somehow she felt safer knowing he was there. It was foolish, she told herself, dangerous even. Men like him, men with reputations, with pasts, weren't the kind you leaned on, weren't the kind you trusted. But the heart, she was learning, didn't always listen to reason. One evening in late September, Mrs. Garvin called her into the parlor. Eliza's stomach sank. The parlor was where deals were made, where men came to negotiate, where women learned what they were worth. "Sit," Mrs. Garvin said, gesturing to a chair. Eliza sat. The older woman studied her for a long moment, her expression calculating. "You've been here 4 months now. You work hard. Keep your mouth shut. That's good. But the kitchen doesn't pay much, and I can't keep you on charity forever." Eliza's chest tightened. "I'm earning my keep." "Barely." Mrs. Garvin leaned back, folding her arms. "But I've got a proposition for you. There's a man, important man, who's taken an interest, wants to meet you properly, have dinner, maybe more if things go well. Don't be stupid, girl. This man's got money, influence. He could set you up real nice, better than anything you'll get scrubbing pots." Eliza's hands clenched in her lap. "Who is he?" Mrs. Garvin smiled. "Victor Willard." The name hit like a fist. Eliza stood, her chair scraping back. "No." "Sit down." "I said no." Mrs. Garvin's smile vanished. "You think you've got choices here? You think you're too good for this?" She stood, her voice hardening. "You're a servant girl with no family, no prospects, and no future. Victor Willard is offering you a way out. You'd be a fool to refuse." Eliza's throat burned. "I won't do it." "Then you'll be out on the street by morning." The words hung in the air, cold and final. Eliza turned and walked out of the room, her vision blurring, her breath coming in short, desperate gasps. She climbed the stairs to the attic, collapsed onto her cot, and pressed her face into the thin pillow to muffle the sound of her crying. She had no choices, no way out, no one to turn to. She was alone. But she was wrong. Because 2 days later, when she was hauling water from the pump in the alley, a voice spoke quietly from the shadows. "You need help." She spun, water sloshing from the bucket. Rafe Navarro stepped into the dim light, his expression serious. I heard what Garvin's trying to do. I heard about Willard. Eliza's heart pounded. It's none of your business. Maybe not. He paused. But I'm making it my business anyway. Why? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. Why do you care? For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression cracked open just for a second. Because I know what it's like, he said quietly. To have the whole world tell you you're nothing. To have people decide who you are before you even open your mouth. To be backed into a corner with no way out. His jaw tightened. And I know what it's like to wish someone had cared enough to step in. Eliza stared at him, her throat tight. I'm not asking you to trust me, Rafe said, but if you want out of here, if you want a chance at something different, I can help. How? There's a ranch north of here, good people. They need help with the horses, the house. I can get you a job, clean work, fair pay. No Garvin, no Willard. It sounded too good to be true. It probably was. But Eliza was drowning, and he was offering her a rope. Why would you do this? She whispered. Rafe's expression softened, just slightly. Because nobody did it for me. What? She left 3 days later. In the dark, before dawn, with nothing but her satchel and the clothes on her back. Rafe met her at the edge of town with a horse and a quiet nod. They rode north in silence, the stars fading overhead, the mountains rising black and jagged against the horizon. Eliza didn't look back. She didn't let herself hope, either. Not yet. But for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. The ranch was called the Double Star, and it sat in a wide valley carved out by a river that ran fast and clear. The land was good, open grazing, timber in the hills, water that didn't run dry. The main house was sturdy and plain, built from logs and river stone, with a wide porch and a roof that didn't leak. There were barns, corrals, a bunkhouse, and a vegetable garden that somebody actually tended. The owners were a man named Thomas Stockwell and his wife Margaret. Thomas was in his 50s, broad-shouldered and graying, with the kind of face that had seen hard years but hadn't gone mean. Margaret was younger, sharp-eyed and quiet, with a way of looking at people that made Eliza feel like she was being measured and found acceptable. Rafe says you're a hard worker, Thomas had said when she'd arrived. That true? Yes, sir. Good. We need help with the house and the horses. Pays fair, rooms clean, and we don't tolerate nonsense. You pull your weight, we'll get along fine. And that had been that. Eliza threw herself into the work with a kind of desperate gratitude. She mucked stalls, hauled feed, scrubbed floors, cooked meals, mended tack. Her hands blistered and healed. Her back ached and strengthened. She learned the rhythm of the ranch, the early mornings, the long days, the quiet evenings when the work was done and the sky burned gold and red. She learned the horses' names, learned which ones were gentle and which ones would test you, learned how to read the weather, how to fix a fence, how to tell when a storm was coming by the way the wind shifted. And she learned Rafe. Not all at once, not in any way she could name, but slowly, in the quiet spaces between work, she started to see him. Not as the dangerous half-breed everyone whispered about, but as a man who worked harder than anyone, who never complained, who spoke rarely but listened always. He was kind to the horses, patient with the younger hands, respectful to Margaret in a way that made Eliza think he'd known good women before, and lost them. He didn't talk about his past, didn't talk about his father or the stories people told. But sometimes, late at night, when the bunkhouse was quiet and the stars were thick overhead, Eliza would see him standing alone by the corral, looking out at the dark hills like he was searching for something he'd never find. She understood that feeling. The first time they spoke, really spoke, was 2 months after she'd arrived. It was evening, and she'd been carrying a bucket of kitchen scraps out to the compost when she'd stumbled on a root and gone sprawling, the bucket flying, her hands hitting the dirt hard. "Damn it!" she hissed, sitting up. "You hurt?" She looked up. Rafe was standing a few feet away, holding a coil of rope. He must have been heading to the barn. "I'm fine," she said, brushing off her hands. Just clumsy. He set the rope down, crouched beside her, and looked at her palms. You're bleeding. It's nothing. It's something. He pulled a bandana from his pocket, clean and faded, and wrapped it gently around her right hand. His touch was careful, steady. Eliza's breath caught. He tied the knot, released her hand, and stood. You should wash that. Don't want it getting infected. I will. She hesitated. Thank you. He nodded, picked up his rope, started to walk away. Rafe? He stopped, turned. Why did you help me? She asked. Back in town, at the butcher's, at Garvin's. Why did you care? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, because I know what it's like to be invisible, and I know what it means when someone finally sees you. He walked away before she could answer. But that night, lying in her narrow bed in the small room off the kitchen, Eliza thought about his words, thought about the way he'd looked at her, not with pity, not with desire, but with recognition, like he saw her, really saw her. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible anymore. Winter came early that year. The snow fell thick and fast, burying the valley in white. The work changed, less riding, more feeding, more time spent indoors keeping the stock warm and the fires burning. The days were short and gray, the nights long and cold. But inside the ranch house, there was warmth. Margaret taught Eliza how to bake bread, how to sew a straight seam, how to make soap from lard and lye. Thomas told stories by the fire, tall tales about cattle drives and blizzards, and the time he'd shot a mountain lion that had been stalking the herd. The ranch hands played cards and argued good-naturedly about everything from horses to politics. And Rafe was just there, quiet, steady, a presence she'd come to depend on without quite realizing it. They worked side by side more often now, feeding the horses, chopping wood, clearing snow from the barn roof. They didn't talk much, didn't need to, but there was a comfort in the silence, a kind of understanding that didn't require words. One afternoon, when they were hauling hay from the loft, Eliza paused to catch her breath. Can I ask you something? Yeah. Why do you stay here? At the ranch, I mean. You could go anywhere. Rafe set down his bale, wiped his forehead. Where would I go? I don't know. Somewhere people don't know your name, somewhere you could start over. He smiled faintly. It was the first time she'd seen him smile, and it changed his whole face, made him look younger, less guarded. People always know your name, he said, or they make one up for you. Doesn't matter where you go. You carry your past with you whether you want to or not. So why here? He looked out at the snow-covered valley, the mountains rising sharp and white against the pale sky. Because Thomas gave me a chance when no one else would. Because this place doesn't ask me to be anything I'm not. He paused. Because it's the closest thing to home I've got. Eliza nodded slowly. She understood that too. Spring arrived like promise. The snow melted. The river swelled. The grass came back green and thick, and the valley exploded with wildflowers, lupine and Indian paintbrush and columbine blooming in riotous color. Eliza felt something shift inside her, something lighter, something almost like hope. She was stronger now, tanned and lean from months of hard work, her hands calloused, her body capable in ways it had never been before. She could ride, could rope, could fix a wagon wheel and birth a calf and read the sky for storms. She wasn't the same girl who'd arrived broken and terrified. And neither, she realized, was her relationship with Rafe. It had changed, deepened, become something she didn't have a name for but felt in every quiet glance, every shared task, every evening when they'd sit on the porch and watch the sun set in silence. She didn't know when it had happened, didn't know when friendship had become something more, but it had. The first time he kissed her, it was late May. They'd been riding fence line, checking for breaks after a storm. The work had taken longer than expected, and by the time they'd finished, the sun was setting, the sky on fire with gold and crimson. They'd stopped to water the horses at a creek, and Eliza had been standing at the water's edge, watching the light play on the surface when Rafe had come up beside her. You ever think about leaving? He'd asked quietly. She'd looked at him, surprised. The ranch? No. This life. all of it. Just starting over somewhere no one knows you. Sometimes, she'd admitted, but I don't know where I'd go or what I'd do. He'd nodded, been quiet for a moment. Then he'd said, If you did leave, like, would you want company? Her heart had stuttered. What do you mean? He'd turned to face her fully, his expression serious, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. I mean, I think you're the bravest person I've ever met, and the kindest. Cool. And He'd stopped, exhaled. I don't want to lose you. Eliza had stared at him, her throat tight, her pulse racing. I don't want to lose you either, she'd whispered. And then he'd kissed her, gently, carefully, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. When he'd pulled back, his forehead resting against hers, she'd felt tears on her cheeks and hadn't known when they'd started. I'm not good at this, he'd said quietly. I don't know how to be whatever you need, but I want to try. So do I, she'd said. And in that moment, standing by the creek with the sky burning above them, Eliza had felt something she hadn't felt in years. She'd felt whole. But the world, she would learn, didn't care about wholeness. It cared about power, about control, about men like Victor Willard, who didn't like being told no. And it cared about the past, about fathers and sons and legacies written in blood. The storm was coming. Eliza just didn't know it yet. Summer arrived with a vengeance that year, the kind of heat that turned the valley into a shimmering mirage by midday and made the work twice as hard. But Eliza didn't mind. For the first time in her life, she woke each morning not with dread, but with something close to contentment. The rhythm of the ranch had become her heartbeat. The creak of the barn door at dawn, the smell of coffee boiling on the stove, the sound of Rafe's voice calling to the horses in that low, steady way of his. They were careful, she and Rafe, careful not to let the others see too much, careful to keep their stolen moments private. Not because they were ashamed, but because what they'd found felt too fragile, too new to expose to scrutiny. At night, after the work was done and the ranch had settled into quiet, they'd meet by the creek or walk out beyond the corrals where the grass grew tall and the stars hung so low you could almost touch them. They'd talk about small things, the horses, the weather, a book Eliza had borrowed from Margaret. And sometimes they wouldn't talk at all, just sit close enough that their shoulders touched, breathing in the cool night air and the scent of sage. Rafe told her things he'd never told anyone. About growing up on the move, never staying in one place long enough to call it home. About his mother, a woman from a Navajo village who'd fallen in love with the wrong man and paid for it with her life. She died when Rafe was 12, her heart giving out during a winter so cold the ground had been too frozen to dig a proper grave. After that, it had been just him and his father, Mateo Navarro, the bandit, the legend, the ghost that still haunted every town Rafe passed through. He wasn't evil, Rafe said one night, his voice quiet and distant. People make him out to be some kind of monster, but he wasn't. He was just angry. At the world, at the men who'd taken everything from us, at himself for not being able to fix it. He thought robbing them was justice, thought he was taking back what they'd stolen first. What happened to him? Eliza asked, though she already knew the answer. They caught him in Colorado, tried him in a courthouse that didn't care about the truth, just wanted a name to hang. He died on a rope in front of a cheering crowd. Rafe's jaw tightened. I wasn't there. He'd sent me away months before, told me to find work and stay out of trouble. I think he knew it was coming. Eliza reached for his hand, laced her fingers through his. I'm sorry. Don't be. He made his choices. I just wish... He trailed off, shaking his head. Doesn't matter now. But it did matter. Eliza could see it in the way his shoulders carried tension even when he was at rest, in the way he sometimes stared at the horizon like he was waiting for something to come for him. The past wasn't done with Rafe Navarro, no matter how far he ran. And she understood that. Because her own past was waiting too, coiled like a snake in the grass, ready to strike. She just didn't know it yet. The first sign of trouble came in late June. Thomas had sent Rafe and 2 of the ranch hands into town to pick up supplies, feed, nails, a new harness for the plow horse. Eliza had stayed behind to help Margaret with the garden, pulling weeds and tying up the tomato plants that had grown wild and heavy. It was hot, mindless work, and her thoughts had drifted the way they always did these days, to Rafe, to the future, to the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she could have something good. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the rider approach until Margaret straightened, shading her eyes. "Someone's coming," she said. Eliza looked up. A lone horseman was making his way up the valley road, moving at an easy trot. Even from a distance, she could tell he wasn't a ranch hand or a drifter. He sat his horse too well, his clothes too clean, his bearing too confident. As he drew closer, Eliza's stomach twisted. She knew that face. Victor Willard. He rode into the yard like he owned it, his black horse gleaming in the sun, his suit immaculate despite the dust. He dismounted with the smooth grace of a man who'd never had to work a day in his life and tipped his hat to Margaret. "Mrs. Stockwell," he said, his voice smooth and cultured. "I hope I'm not intruding." Margaret's expression was polite but cool. "Mr. Willard, what brings you all the way out here?" "Business, mostly. I'm looking to expand my holdings in the valley, and I thought I'd see if your husband might be interested in selling." "We're not selling," Willard smiled. "I haven't made an offer yet." "Doesn't matter. This land's been in Thomas's family for 20 years. We're not selling." "Fair enough." His gaze shifted, landing on Eliza. His smile widened. "Well, well, Miss Crow, isn't it? I didn't expect to find you here." Eliza's mouth went dry. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Mr. Willard." "I heard you'd left Mrs. Garvin's establishment rather suddenly. I was concerned. A young woman alone on the frontier, it's dangerous. I'm glad to see you've landed somewhere respectable." The way he said the word made her skin crawl. Margaret stepped forward, placing herself subtly between Eliza and Willard. "Miss Crow works for us now. She's an excellent hand." "I'm sure she is." Willard's gaze lingered on Eliza a moment longer, something cold and calculating in his eyes. Then he turned back to Margaret, all charm again. "Please give my regards to your husband. And if he changes his mind about selling, he knows where to find me." He mounted his horse, tipped his hat once more, and rode away. Eliza stood frozen, her heart hammering. Margaret touched her arm gently. "You all right?" "I'm fine," Eliza lied. But she wasn't fine. Because Victor Willard didn't ride an hour out of town just to make a casual offer on land. He'd come to remind her that he knew where she was, that he hadn't forgotten, that she wasn't as safe as she thought. When Rafe returned that evening, Eliza told him what had happened. His face went hard. "He say anything else? Threaten you?" "No, he was polite, but the way he looked at me..." She shivered. "He knows I'm here, Rafe. What if he tries something?" "He won't." Rafe's voice was flat, certain. "Thomas and Margaret won't let him, and I won't either. You can't be with me every second. Then I'll make damn sure you're never alone when it matters." He gripped her shoulders gently, his eyes fierce. "Listen to me. Willard's a bully and a snake, but he's not stupid. He knows this ranch is protected. He won't make a move here. And if I leave the ranch, then I go with you." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that the walls they'd built around this fragile life were strong enough. But she'd learned the hard way that safety was a lie people told themselves to sleep at night. Still, she nodded, let herself lean into him for just a moment, drawing strength from the steady beat of his heart. "I won't let him take you," Rafe said quietly. "I promise." It was a promise he meant, a promise he would keep no matter the cost. But some promises, Eliza would learn, came with a price neither of them could afford. July brought fire. Not the kind you could see, but the kind that burned beneath the surface, slow and relentless. The valley was tinder dry, the grass yellow and brittle, the creek running lower than anyone had seen in years. Tempers ran short. Disputes over water rights turned ugly. Fights broke out in town over slights real and imagined. And Victor Willard moved through it all like a shark through blood-warm water, buying up desperate claims, foreclosing on loans, tightening his grip on Coultridge one piece at a time. Eliza heard the stories from the ranch hands who came back from town. A widow who'd lost her homestead because she couldn't pay the mortgage. A farmer who'd sold his land for a fraction of what it was worth just to feed his children. A miner who'd disappeared after refusing to sell his claim, his body found weeks later in a ravine with a bullet in his back. No one could prove Willard was behind it. But everyone knew. He's building something, Thomas said one night over dinner, his expression grim. An empire, and he doesn't care who he crushes to get it. Someone needs to stop him, Margaret said. Who? The marshal's in his pocket. The judge, too. Half the town owes him money. Thomas shook his head. Men like Willard don't stop. They just keep taking until there's nothing left. Eliza said nothing, but her hands clenched in her lap beneath the table. She could feel Rafe's gaze on her, steady and worried, but she didn't look up, because she knew, deep in her bones, that this wasn't over, that Willard hadn't forgotten about her, that sooner or later he'd come back, and when he did, the fragile piece she'd found would shatter like glass. It happened on a Saturday in late July. Eliza had gone into town with Margaret to trade eggs and butter for flour and sugar. It was market day, the streets crowded with farmers and miners and families stocking up for the week. The air smelled of dust and sweat and roasting corn. Children ran between the stalls, shrieking with laughter. A fiddler played near the saloon, his bow dancing over the strings. For a moment, Eliza let herself relax, let herself believe that she was just another woman at the market, ordinary and unremarkable, her past buried and forgotten. Then she saw him. Victor Willard stood outside the land office, talking with two men in expensive suits. He looked up as if he'd felt her gaze, and their eyes met across the crowded street. He smiled. Eliza's blood turned to ice. Eliza? Margaret's voice was sharp with concern. What is it? Nothing, Eliza said quickly. She turned away, her hands shaking. I need some air. She walked blindly toward the edge of town, her heart racing, her breath coming in short gasps. She could feel his eyes on her back, could feel the weight of his attention like a physical thing. She'd barely made it past the livery when a voice called out behind her. Miss Crow, a word if you please. She stopped, turned slowly. Victor Willard approached alone, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression pleasant. Up close, he was older than she'd thought, maybe 40, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of late nights and hard calculations. I don't have anything to say to you, Eliza said, her voice steadier than she felt. No, that's a shame. I have quite a bit to say to you. He stopped a few feet away, studying her with the kind of casual appraisal a man might give livestock at auction. You've done well for yourself at the Stockwell Ranch. Honest work, fresh air. I'm told you're quite valuable to Mrs. Stockwell. What do you want? The same thing I wanted months ago. Your company, your time. His smile widened. Your gratitude. I'm not interested. You say that now. But circumstances change, Miss Crow. Fortunes shift. The Stockwells are good people, but they're barely holding on. One bad season, one missed loan payment, and they'll lose everything. He paused, letting the words sink in. I could help them. I could make sure they keep their land, their livelihood. All I'd need in return is a little cooperation from you. Eliza's stomach turned. You're threatening them. I'm offering a solution. Think about it. You could save that family. All you have to do is be reasonable. Go to hell. Willard's smile didn't falter, but something cold flickered in his eyes. You know, I admire your spirit. It's rare to find a woman with backbone these days, but spirit without sense is just stupidity, and I don't tolerate stupidity, Miss Crow. Are we done here? For now, he tipped his hat. But I'll be seeing you again, soon. He walked away, whistling a tune that made Eliza's skin crawl. She stood there, shaking, until Margaret found her. What did he say to you? Margaret demanded. Eliza told her. Everything. Margaret's face went white, then red with fury. That bastard! That goddamn bastard! She grabbed Eliza's arm. Come on, we're going home, and we're telling Thomas everything. Thomas listened in silence, his jaw tight, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the table. When Eliza finished, he stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening valley. He can't do this, Margaret said. He can't just... He can, Thomas said quietly, and he will. Unless we stop him. How? Rafe's voice was low, dangerous. He stood near the door, his arms crossed, his expression carved from stone. You said it yourself. He owns the law in this town. Then we go around the law. Thomas, I'm not letting him take this ranch, and I'm sure as hell not letting him take Eliza. Thomas turned, his eyes hard. We make a stand. Here. Now. And if he brings men, Rafe asked, then we'll be ready. The room fell silent. Eliza's throat tightened. This is my fault. I should leave, go somewhere he can't find me. No, Rafe said sharply. You're not running. Not again. He's right, Thomas said. Running just gives Willard more power. We stand together or we fall alone. Margaret reached across the table, covering Eliza's hand with her own. You're family now, and we protect family. Eliza's eyes burned. She didn't trust herself to speak. But that night, lying in her narrow bed, she made a decision. If Willard wanted a fight, she'd give him one, but on her terms, not his. Torsichul. The next 2 weeks passed in tense, watchful silence. Thomas doubled the guard on the ranch, keeping men posted at night. Rafe barely left Eliza's side, his hand never far from the rifle he now carried everywhere. Margaret moved through the house with a shotgun propped beside the kitchen door, her mouth set in a grim line. Eliza waited. Worked. Tried not to think about what was coming. But she knew. Deep down, she knew. Willard wasn't done. The blow came not with violence, but with paper. A writer arrived one afternoon with a letter for Thomas. The envelope was expensive, the handwriting neat and official. Thomas opened it, read it, and went pale. What is it? Margaret asked. He handed her the letter without a word. Margaret scanned it, her face draining of color. No, this can't be legal. What does it say? Eliza asked. Thomas looked at her, his expression hollow. Willard's calling in a loan I took out 3 years ago to buy new stock. It's due in full in 30 days. If I don't pay, he forecloses on the ranch. The room tilted. How much? Rafe asked quietly. More than we have. More than we can get. Margaret crumpled the letter in her fist. There has to be a way. We'll sell the cattle, the horses. It won't be enough. He made sure of that. Eliza stood, her chair scraping back. This is because of me. He's doing this to get to me. We don't know that, Margaret said, but her voice lacked conviction. Yes, we do. Eliza's hands trembled. And I won't let you lose everything because of me. Eliza! But she was already walking out, her vision blurred with tears and rage. Rafe caught up with her outside. Where are you going? To fix this. How? She turned to face him, her jaw set. I'm going to give Willard what he wants. Like hell you are. It's the only way. No. Rafe gripped her shoulders. You're not sacrificing yourself for this. I won't let you. Then what do you suggest? Let Thomas lose his home? Let Margaret lose everything? They took me in when I had nothing, Rafe. I owe them. You don't owe them your life. Maybe not. But I won't stand by and watch them suffer because of me. Rafe's eyes were wild, desperate. There has to be another way. There isn't. You know there isn't. For a long moment, they stood there, locked in silent battle. Then Rafe pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her so tightly she could barely breathe. I can't lose you, he said, his voice breaking. I can't. Eliza closed her eyes, memorizing the feel of him, the warmth, the strength, the steady beat of his heart against hers. You won't. I promise. It was a lie, and they both knew it, but sometimes lies were all you had left. That night, Eliza lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. There had to be a way out. Had to be something she was missing. Some angle, some leverage, some piece of the puzzle that would make everything fall into place. But no matter how hard she thought, she kept coming back to the same conclusion. Willard held all the cards, and he knew it. Unless... An idea flickered at the edge of her mind, small and dangerous. What if she didn't go to Willard as a supplicant, but as a player? What if she had something he wanted more than control, more than power? What if she had information? She sat up slowly, her heart pounding. Rafe had told her things Things about his father, about the people Mateo had worked with, the men who'd helped him hide, the routes he'd used to move stolen goods, things that might still be valuable to someone like Willard, who dealt in secrets and leverage as much as land and money. It was a betrayal. A terrible, unforgivable betrayal of everything Rafe had trusted her with. But it might also be the only way to save him, to save all of them. Eliza buried her face in her hands, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She didn't know if she could do it, didn't know if she was strong enough or cruel enough to use Rafe's pain as currency, but she also didn't know if she could live with herself if she did nothing and watched everything burn. Morning came too soon. Eliza moved through her chores like a ghost, her mind 1,000 miles away. Rafe watched her with worried eyes, but he didn't push. Margaret tried to draw her into conversation, but Eliza's answers were short and distracted. By noon, she'd made her decision. She waited until Rafe and Thomas had ridden out to check the north pasture. Then she went to Margaret. "I need to go into town." Margaret looked up from the stove. "Why?" "I have to talk to someone. About the loan." "Eliza, if you're thinking of going to Willard, I have to try. Please, let me try." Margaret searched her face for a long moment, then she sighed. "Take the wagon, and take the shotgun. Don't trust him for a second." "I won't." The ride into Coultridge took an hour. By the time Eliza reached the main street, the sun was high and brutal, the town shimmering in the heat. She tied the wagon outside Willard's office, a 2-story brick building with polished windows and a sign that read, "Willard Enterprises" in gold letters. She climbed the steps, her legs shaking, and knocked. A clerk answered, a thin man with spectacles. "Can I help you?" "I need to see Mr. Willard. Tell him it's Eliza Crow." The clerk's eyebrows rose. "Wait here." He disappeared inside. Eliza stood in the hallway, her hands clenched, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The door opened. "Miss Crow." Victor Willard stood framed in the doorway, his expression pleased. "What a delightful surprise. Please, come in." She stepped inside. The office was elegant, dark wood furniture, leather chairs, a massive desk covered in neat stacks of paper. On the wall hung a map of the valley, dotted with colored pins marking properties Willard owned. He gestured to a chair. "Sit. Can I offer you tea? Whiskey?" "I'm not here for pleasantries." "No, I suppose not." He settled into his own chair, steepling his fingers. "You're here to negotiate." "I'm here to make you an offer." His smile widened. "I'm listening." Eliza forced herself to meet his eyes. "You drop the loan against the Stockwells. Let them keep their ranch. In return, I'll give you information, valuable information." "What kind of information?" She took a breath. "About Mateo Navarro's network, the men who helped him, the routes he used, everything his son knows." Willard's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Interest. Hunger. "And why," he said slowly, "would you betray the man you're sleeping with?" Heat flooded Eliza's face. "That's my business." "Fair enough." He leaned back, considering. "But I have to ask, what makes you think this information is worth the price you're asking? Because some of those men are still operating, still moving goods through the territory, and I'm betting you'd like to know who they are, where they are, how to find them." Willard's smile returned, sharp and satisfied. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for, Miss Crow. Do we have a deal?" He stood, walked to the window, gazed out at the street below. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he turned. "We have a deal, on one condition." Eliza's stomach sank. "What condition?" "You don't just give me the information. You come work for me, as my assistant, my companion. You'll live in my house, attend social functions with me, and be seen as mine. In return, I forgive the loan, protect the Stockwells, and ensure that you and your friends are left alone." "That wasn't the deal." "It is now." His eyes were cold. "Take it or leave it, Miss Crow. But if you leave, the Stockwells lose everything, and you lose the man you're trying so hard to protect." Eliza's hand shook. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to run, but she couldn't. Because he was right. She was trapped. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. A year. After that, you're free. A year. 12 months of being Willard's possession, his trophy, his lie. But the Stockwells would be safe. Rafe would be safe. And maybe, just maybe, she'd find a way to survive. All right, she said, we have a deal. Willard's smile was triumphant. Excellent. You'll move into my house tomorrow. I'll send a carriage. Eliza stood on trembling legs. I need to go back to the ranch. Say goodbye. Of course. But remember, Miss Crow, if you run, if you break our agreement, the deal is void, and I will take everything. I understand. She walked out of the office, down the stairs, into the brutal sunlight. She climbed into the wagon, took the reins, and drove out of town. And she didn't let herself cry until she was far enough away that no one could see. She told them that night. Margaret wept. Thomas raged. Rafe went silent, his face white, his eyes empty. You can't do this, he said finally, his voice flat and terrible. You can't. It's already done. Then undo it. We'll find another way. There is no other way, Eliza's voice cracked. Don't you see? This is the only way to save you, to save all of you. I don't want to be saved, Rafe grabbed her arms. Not like this. Not if it means losing you. You're not losing me. It's just a year, 1 year, and then what? You think Willard's going to let you go? You think he's going to keep his word? Rafe's grip tightened. He's a liar and a monster, Eliza. Once you're in his house, you'll never get out. I have to try. No, you have to fight. He pulled her close, his voice breaking. We fight together, like we always have. But Eliza shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I can't fight him, Rafe. I'm not strong enough. Yes, you are. You're the strongest person I know. Then why do I feel like I'm breaking? He had no answer for that. The carriage came at dawn. Eliza stood on the porch with a single bag, her eyes dry, her heart numb. Margaret hugged her fiercely. Thomas gripped her shoulder, his jaw tight. Rafe stood apart, his face carved from stone. I'll come back, Eliza said. I promise. No one answered. She climbed into the carriage. The driver flicked the reins, the wheels began to turn. And as the ranch disappeared behind her, Eliza looked back one last time. Rafe was still standing there, watching her go, his silhouette sharp against the rising sun. She turned away. Because if she kept looking, she'd break, and she couldn't afford to break. Not yet. The house on the hill was everything the ranch wasn't, cold, polished, suffocating in its perfection. Crystal chandeliers hung from painted ceilings. Persian rugs covered floors so clean they reflected the light like dark water. Every piece of furniture was expensive, imported, arranged with the kind of precision that suggested no one actually lived there. It was a monument to wealth, not a home. And from the moment Eliza stepped through the heavy oak door, she felt the walls closing in. A housekeeper named Mrs. Dorn, a severe woman with gray hair pulled into a merciless bun, showed her upstairs to a bedroom decorated in cream and gold. The bed was enormous, draped in silk. A wardrobe stood open, already filled with dresses Eliza had never seen, in colors and fabrics she'd never worn. They weren't hers. They were costumes for the role Willard expected her to play. Mr. Willard requests your presence at dinner, Mrs. Dorn said, her voice clipped and formal. 6 o'clock. Don't be late. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a lock turning. Eliza stood in the center of the room, her bag still clutched in her hand, and forced herself to breathe. 1 year, 365 days. She could survive that. She'd survived worse. Except she hadn't. Not really. She'd survived poverty and loss and grief. But those had been honest hardships. This was something different. This was a gilded cage, and the bars were made of obligation and fear. She set her bag down, walked to the window, and looked out over the valley. From up here, Coultridge looked almost beautiful. The buildings small and neat, the river a silver ribbon, the mountains rising like sentinels in the distance. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of town, was the ranch, the corrals, the barn, the creek where she and Rafe had kissed for the first time. Her chest tightened. She pressed her palm against the glass, the coolness grounding her. She couldn't think about him. Couldn't let herself remember the look on his face when the carriage had pulled away. If she did, she'd break. And breaking meant giving Willard exactly what he wanted. Proof that she was weak, that she could be controlled, that she belonged to him. She wouldn't give him that. Not ever. Dinner was a performance. Eliza wore one of the dresses from the wardrobe, deep green silk that fit her perfectly, as if Willard had somehow known her measurements. It made her skin crawl. The idea that he'd been planning this, preparing for her, long before she'd walked into his office. Mrs. Dorn had pinned her hair up, applied rouge to her cheeks and lips, and stood back with a critical eye. "You'll do," she'd said. Now Eliza sat at one end of a long mahogany table, candlelight flickering between them, as Willard carved into a roasted pheasant with surgical precision. He'd changed into evening clothes, his hair slicked back, his expression pleasant and relaxed. He looked like a man who'd just won a particularly satisfying hand of cards. "You look lovely," he said, not looking up from his plate. "Green suits you." Eliza said nothing. She pushed food around her plate, her appetite gone. "You're quiet? Nervous, perhaps?" He glanced at her, his smile thin. "There's no need. I'm not a monster, Miss Crow. I simply expect certain standards to be maintained. Civility, decorum, loyalty." "Loyalty," she repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. "Yes. You've agreed to a bargain, and I expect you to honor it. In public, you'll be my companion, gracious, attentive, appropriately affectionate. You'll attend social functions, host dinners, represent me well. In private," he paused, cutting another piece of meat. "In private, you'll do as you're told." Eliza's hands clenched in her lap. "And if I refuse? Then our agreement is void, and the Stockwells lose everything. We've been over this." He took a sip of wine, watching her over the rim of the glass. "But I don't think you'll refuse. You're too smart for that. Too practical." "You mean too desperate?" "Desperation and practicality often look the same." He set his glass down. "Eat. You'll need your strength." She wanted to throw the plate at him, wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but sit there and play the obedient doll. But she forced herself to pick up her fork, to take a bite, to swallow past the lump in her throat. Because he was right. She was desperate, and desperation made you do terrible things. The weeks that followed blurred together into a waking nightmare of silk and suffocation. Willard paraded her through Coultridge like a prize, his hand always at the small of her back, his smile always in place. They attended a reception at the mayor's house, where men in expensive suits congratulated Willard on his good fortune, and their wives looked at Eliza with a mixture of pity and disdain. They went to the theater, a traveling troupe performing Shakespeare in a drafty hall, and sat in the best seats while Willard's hand rested possessively on her arm. They hosted a dinner party for a group of investors from San Francisco, and Eliza smiled until her face ached and poured wine and nodded at the right moments while the men talked about land and money and progress as if people were just pieces on a board. At night, Willard would walk her to her bedroom door, kiss her hand with exaggerated courtesy, and remind her that she was doing so well, that he was pleased with her, that she should be grateful for the life he was providing. He never forced himself into her room, never demanded more than the performance, but the threat was always there, unspoken but real, hanging over her like a blade. And Eliza learned to bury herself, to become someone else, to smile when she wanted to scream, to speak when she wanted to stay silent, to move through each day like a ghost haunting her own life. But at night, alone in the dark, she'd press her face into the pillow and let herself remember. The smell of horses and hay, the sound of Rafe's voice, low and steady, the way his hands had held hers, rough and gentle at once. She wondered if he thought about her, wondered if he hated her for leaving, wondered if he'd moved on, buried his feelings the way she was trying to bury hers. She hoped he had, because one of them deserved to be free. 2 months into her captivity, the sickness started. At first, it was just nausea in the mornings, a queasiness that faded by midday. She blamed it on stress, on the rich food she wasn't used to, on the tight corsets Mrs. Dorn insisted she wear. But when the nausea turned to vomiting, when her monthly courses failed to come, when her breasts became tender and swollen, the truth crashed over her like a wave. She was pregnant. Eliza sat on the edge of the bathtub, her hands shaking, her mind racing. It had to be Rafe's. Had to be from those stolen nights at the ranch, those moments of warmth and hope before everything had fallen apart. The timing fit. The dates aligned. But no one would believe her. To the world, she was Victor Willard's mistress. She lived in his house, wore his gifts, appeared at his side. If she told him she was carrying another man's child, he'd either throw her out, breaking the deal and destroying the Stockwells, or worse, he'd find a way to use it against her. And if she told Rafe, if he knew, she couldn't, because he'd come for her. He'd do something reckless and stupid and brave, and Willard would destroy him. She couldn't let that happen. So she buried it. Added it to the growing list of things she couldn't think about, couldn't acknowledge, couldn't let break through the surface. But her body betrayed her anyway. Mrs. Dorn noticed first. "You're getting sick in the mornings," she said one day, her eyes sharp and knowing, "and you've let out 2 dresses already." Eliza's heart stopped. "It's nothing, just my stomach." "Don't lie to me, girl. I've seen this before." The housekeeper's expression was unreadable. "Does Mr. Willard know?" "There's nothing to know. He'll figure it out soon enough. And when he does—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "You'd better hope he's pleased." But Eliza knew Willard wouldn't be pleased. He'd be furious. Because a pregnant mistress was a complication, a liability, proof that he didn't have complete control. She had to tell him. Had to get ahead of it before he found out another way. The thought made her want to vomit all over again. She chose a night when he was in a good mood, after a successful business meeting that had left him expansive and generous. They were in his study, a dark-paneled room lined with books he'd probably never read, and he was pouring brandy, talking about his plans to buy out a competitor. "You've been quiet lately," he said, handing her a glass. "Something on your mind?" Eliza stared at the amber liquid, her stomach churning. She set the glass down. "I need to tell you something." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh? This sounds serious. I'm pregnant." The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. Willard went very still. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, something cold and calculating. He set his own glass down slowly, carefully, and walked to the window. "How far along?" 3 months? Maybe 4? "I see." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned, his face a mask of pleasant composure. "Well, this is unexpected." "I know. I'm sorry." "Sorry?" He laughed, the sound sharp and humorless. "Why would you be sorry? This is perfect." Eliza's blood turned to ice. "What?" "Think about it. A child, my child as far as anyone knows, gives me legitimacy, respectability. It makes our arrangement look like something more, a love match, a family." His smile widened. "This is exactly what I needed." "It's not your child." The words were out before she could stop them. Willard's smile froze. "Excuse me?" Eliza's hands trembled. "It's not yours. It can't be. We've never—" "No," he said softly, dangerously. "We haven't, which means you came to me already pregnant, already carrying some ranch hand's bastard." He took a step closer. "Tell me. Was it Navarro?" She said nothing. "Of course it was." He laughed again, but there was no humor in it now, only rage barely leashed. "You stupid, stupid girl. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I'll leave. Break the deal. You can foreclose on the Stockwells and I'll—" "You'll do nothing." His hand shot out, gripping her arm hard enough to bruise. "You think I'd let you walk away now, after I've invested months in you, after the whole town has seen us together?" He pulled her closer, his breath hot on her face. "No, you're going to stay. You're going to have that baby, and you're going to tell everyone it's mine." "I won't." "Yes, you will. Because if you don't, I'll make sure Rafe Navarro hangs for his father's crimes. I'll fabricate evidence, buy witnesses, do whatever it takes to put a rope around his neck. And you'll watch." Eliza's vision blurred with tears. "You're a monster." "I'm a businessman." He released her arm, stepped back, smoothed his vest. "And you're my asset. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to play the devoted mother-to-be. You're going to smile and accept congratulations and act like you're thrilled. And when that baby is born, it will carry my name. Is that clear?" She wanted to fight, wanted to scream, but she had no weapons, no leverage, no way out. "Yes," she whispered. "Good." He poured himself another brandy. "Now, get out. I have work to do." Eliza fled to her room and locked the door. She sank to the floor, her back against the wood, and let herself sob, great wrenching gasps that tore through her chest and left her hollow. She was trapped, completely, utterly trapped, and the life growing inside her was now just another chain. The next months were a special kind of hell. Willard announced the pregnancy at a dinner party, his hand resting on Eliza's rounded stomach, his smile proud and possessive. The guests raised their glasses, offered congratulations, told Eliza how lucky she was. The women gave her advice about childbirth and child rearing. The men clapped Willard on the back and made crude jokes about his virility, and Eliza smiled, nodded, played her part. Inside, she was screaming. She thought about running, thought about stealing a horse in the middle of the night and riding until she couldn't ride anymore. But Willard had made his threat clear, and she believed him. If she ran, Rafe would die, and she couldn't live with that. So she stayed, let herself be dressed and displayed and paraded through town like a broodmare. Let the women coo over her growing belly. Let Willard's hand rest on her back at social functions, his touch a constant reminder of who owned her. And through it all, she felt the baby move inside her. Small flutters at first, then stronger kicks. And she hated herself for the love she already felt. Because this child was innocent. This child was hers and Rafe's, born from something real and good, even if the world would never know it. She had to protect it, had to find a way to survive long enough to bring it into the world safely, even if it killed her. Then one frozen morning in late November, everything changed. Eliza woke to the sound of horses in the yard, men's voices raised in argument. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, her belly now too large for most of her dresses, and went to the window. A group of riders had arrived, their horses lathered and blowing steam in the cold air. At the center of the group was a woman Eliza had never seen before, tall, elegant, with dark hair piled high and a fur-trimmed coat that spoke of Eastern money. She was arguing with Willard, her voice sharp and imperious. Eliza couldn't hear the words, but she could see the fury on the woman's face, the way Willard stood rigid and defensive. Then the woman slapped him. The crack echoed across the yard. Willard's face went white, then red. He grabbed the woman's wrist, said something low and vicious. She wrenched free, spat something back, and stormed toward the house. Eliza stepped back from the window, her heart racing. A moment later, the bedroom door slammed open. The woman stood there, breathing hard, her eyes blazing. Up close, Eliza could see she was older than she'd first appeared, maybe 40, with fine lines around her eyes and mouth. But she was beautiful in the hard, polished way of women who'd learned to use beauty as currency. "So you're the little whore he replaced me with," she said. Eliza's mouth went dry. "Who are you?" "I'm Catherine Willard, Victor's wife." The world tilted. Wife. Willard was married. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't." Catherine's laugh was bitter. "He never tells his mistresses about me. Finds it inconvenient." She walked into the room, her eyes taking in the expensive furniture, the silk dresses, Eliza's swollen belly. "How far along are you?" 7 months. "And I suppose he's claiming it's his?" Eliza said nothing. Catherine's expression softened, just slightly. "Let me guess. You made a deal with him. He offered to help you, to save someone you loved, and all you had to do was cooperate. How did you—" "Because he's done it before. 3 times, that I know of. Pretty girls in desperate situations who think they can bargain with the devil and come out ahead." She shook her head. "They never do." "What happened to them?" "One killed herself. One disappeared, probably paid off and sent away. The third—" Catherine's jaw tightened. "The third got pregnant. Victor kept her locked in this house until she gave birth, then took the baby and had her committed to an asylum. Said she'd gone mad with grief." Eliza's blood turned to ice. "The baby, he gave it to a childless couple in Sacramento, told everyone the mother had died in childbirth." Catherine's eyes were hard. "He wanted an heir, you see. something to legitimize his empire, but he couldn't have one with me, and he couldn't acknowledge a bastard, so he found other ways. Eliza sank onto the bed, her hands cradling her belly protectively. He's going to take my baby. Yes. And then what? Lock me away? Kill me? I don't know, but whatever he has planned, it won't be pretty. Catherine sat beside her, her expression grim. Unless you leave. Now. While you still can. I can't. He'll hurt the man you love. I know. He told me about the ranch hand, about the leverage he's holding over you. She paused. But what if I told you there was a way out? For both of you? Eliza looked at her, hope and suspicion warring in her chest. Why would you help me? Because I'm tired of watching him destroy lives. Because I hate him with every fiber of my being. Because, Catherine's voice cracked, because I was you once. Young and desperate and stupid enough to think I could survive him. And I want to save at least one person from making my mistakes. What do I have to do? Catherine leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. There's a lawyer in Denver, a man who owes me a favor. He has documents, evidence of Victor's illegal dealings, land fraud, bribery, worse, enough to put him in prison for a very long time. But I can't get the evidence out. I'm watched too closely. You, however, he watches me too. Not as closely as he thinks. Catherine pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. This is the lawyer's address. If you can get to Denver, if you can deliver a message to him, he'll know what to do. And once Victor's arrested, the deals he's made, including whatever hold he has over your ranch hand, will be void. Eliza stared at the paper, her hands shaking. Why now? Why not do this before? Because I didn't have the courage. But seeing you, Catherine's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You deserve better than this. Your baby deserves better. It was a trap, had to be. No one helped anyone without wanting something in return. But Eliza was drowning, and Catherine was offering her a rope. How do I get to Denver? I have a carriage waiting. 2 of my men, loyal to me, not Victor, will drive you. You'll leave tonight while Victor's at his club. By the time he realizes you're gone, you'll be halfway there. And if he catches me, then we're both dead. Catherine stood, her expression fierce. But I'd rather die trying than live like this. Eliza looked down at her belly, at the baby kicking gently beneath her hands. Rafe's baby, their baby. She couldn't let Willard take it, couldn't let him win. All right, she said. I'll do it. The escape was terrifyingly simple. Eliza packed a small bag, just clothes, a little money she'd managed to hide, the photograph of her mother. She waited until the house was dark and quiet, until she heard Willard's carriage leave for his club. Then she slipped down the back stairs, out through the kitchen, and into the yard where Catherine's men were waiting. They didn't speak, just helped her into the carriage, tucked a blanket around her, and set off into the night. Eliza watched the house disappear into the darkness, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She was free. For now. The journey to Denver took 3 days of hard travel over rough roads. Eliza spent most of it braced against the carriage wall, her hands cradling her belly, praying the jolting wouldn't send her into early labor. The men, gruff, silent types who clearly owed Catherine a great debt, stopped only when necessary, pushing through day and night until the mountains gave way to the sprawling outskirts of the city. Denver was nothing like Coldridge. It was enormous, chaotic, alive with noise and motion. Buildings rose 3 and 4 stories high. Streets teemed with wagons and pedestrians. The air smelled of coal smoke and river water and possibility. The men took her to an office in a brick building near the Capitol. A brass plaque on the door read, James Hartford, Attorney at Law. Wait here, one of the men said, and disappeared inside. Eliza stood in the hallway, her legs shaking with exhaustion, her back aching, her mind a blur of fear and hope. The door opened. A man emerged, late 50s, gray-haired, with sharp eyes and a kind face. Miss Crow, he said. I've been expecting you. Please, come in. She followed him into a cluttered office filled with law books and papers. He gestured to a chair. Catherine sent word you were coming. She also sent these. He opened a desk drawer, pulled out a thick envelope. Everything we need to bring Victor Willard to justice. Bank records, forged deeds, testimonies from men he's blackmailed or bribed. It's damning. Can you arrest him? With this? Absolutely. But it will take time. Warrants need to be issued, marshals dispatched, and Willard has powerful friends. He studied her carefully. You'll need to stay hidden until the arrest is made. He'll come looking for you. I know. I have a place, a boarding house run by a woman I trust. You'll be safe there until the baby comes. After that, he paused. After that, you'll be free, truly free. Eliza closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We still have a fight ahead. But for the first time in months, Eliza felt something she'd thought was lost forever. She felt hope. The boarding house was warm and plain, run by a widow named Mrs. Keene, who asked no questions and offered only kindness. Eliza was given a small room on the second floor, clean and simple, with a bed and a window that looked out over a garden where early snow had dusted the bare branches. She rested, ate, felt her strength slowly return, and she waited. 3 weeks later, on a cold December morning, the labor pains began. They started as a dull ache in her back, then sharpened into waves that stole her breath and left her gasping. Mrs. Keene sent for a midwife, a capable woman with strong hands and a no-nonsense manner, and together they saw Eliza through the long, brutal hours of childbirth. It was pain like nothing she'd ever known, pain that tore through her body and mind, that made her scream and curse and beg for it to stop. But beneath the pain was something fiercer, a determination to survive, to bring this child into the world, to give it the life she'd fought so hard to protect. And then, in the pale light of dawn, she heard it, a cry, thin and reedy and perfect. It's a girl, the midwife said, placing the tiny, wriggling bundle on Eliza's chest. Eliza looked down at her daughter, red-faced and furious, with dark hair and eyes that would probably turn the same deep brown as Rafe's, and felt her heart crack open. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, little one." The baby quieted, her tiny fist curling around Eliza's finger, and in that moment, Eliza made a vow. No one would take this child from her, not Willard, not anyone. She would fight, she would survive, and she would make sure her daughter knew love, knew safety, knew that she was wanted, no matter what it cost. But fate, as always, had other plans. Because 2 days later, while Eliza was still recovering, still learning how to feed and soothe her newborn daughter, Mrs. Keene came to her room with a grim expression. "There's a man here," she said. "Says he's from Victor Willard. Says he's here to take the baby." Eliza's blood turned to ice. "No, he can't. The lawyer said, the lawyer's been delayed. Some legal complication. The warrant hasn't been issued yet." Then I run. I take her and I run. "Where? You can barely walk. You have no money, no horse, and Willard's man is downstairs with a court order claiming the child is his." Mrs. Keene's eyes were full of sorrow. "I'm sorry, dear. I don't know what else to do." Eliza looked down at her daughter, sleeping peacefully in her arms, and felt the world collapse. She'd fought so hard, sacrificed so much, and it still wasn't enough. Then, through the fog of despair, a wild idea flickered. "Mrs. Keene," she said slowly, "do you know anyone at all, who's recently had a baby?" The widow frowned. "Well, there's a woman 2 streets over. Her baby was born the same night as yours. Boy, though, why?" "Because," Eliza said, her voice steady despite the terror flooding her veins, "I'm going to give them the wrong child." Mrs. Keene stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "You want to do what?" "Swap the babies. Give Willard's man the boy from 2 streets over. Tell him it's mine." Eliza's voice was shaking but determined. "He's never seen my daughter. He doesn't know if I had a boy or girl, and newborns all look the same." "That's madness. What about the other mother? You can't just take her child." "I'm not taking him. I'm borrowing him. Just long enough for the man to leave. Then we switch them back." Eliza clutched her daughter tighter, feeling the baby's warmth against her chest. "Please, it's the only way. If he takes her, I'll never see her again. Willard will disappear her, and I'll... Her voice broke. I can't lose her. I can't. Mrs. Keene's face was pale, torn between compassion and fear. And if they find out, if Willard discovers the deception, then I'll already be gone. I'll take my daughter and disappear, change our names, go somewhere he can't find us. You're talking about running for the rest of your life. Better that than watching her grow up believing Victor Willard is her father. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the baby's soft breathing. Then Mrs. Keene closed her eyes, exhaled slowly, and nodded. The woman's name is Clara Bennett. Her husband died 3 months ago. She's desperate, barely scraping by. I'll talk to her, offer her money, tell her it's just for an hour, that there's no danger to her boy. Thank you, Eliza whispered. Thank you. Mrs. Keene stood, her expression grim. If this goes wrong, we'll both hang. You know that, don't you? I know. The widow left, her footsteps heavy on the stairs. Eliza looked down at her daughter, memorizing every detail, the curve of her tiny ears, the dark lashes resting against her cheeks, the perfect bow of her mouth. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry you were born into this. But I promise you, I promise, I will fix it. The baby stirred, made a small sound that might have been contentment or complaint, and Eliza held her tighter, fighting back tears. 20 minutes later, Mrs. Keene returned with a bundle wrapped in a worn blanket. Inside was a sleeping infant boy, his face round and peaceful, his fists curled beneath his chin. Clara agreed, Mrs. Keene said quietly. I told her we needed to borrow him for a legal matter, gave her $10 and promised he'd be back within the hour. Eliza nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She looked down at her daughter one last time, then carefully, gently, handed her to Mrs. Keene. Hide her, somewhere safe. Don't let anyone see her. I will. Mrs. Keene took the baby, her expression fierce. I'll guard her with my life. Then she was gone, disappearing into the back of the house with Eliza's daughter cradled against her chest. Eliza took the baby boy, wrapped him in her own blanket, and lay back against the pillows, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. She arranged the blanket so only the baby's face showed, tucked him close, and forced her expression into something tired and defeated. A moment later, footsteps echoed up the stairs. The door opened. A man stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, with cold eyes and a face that looked like it had never smiled. He wore a dark suit and carried a leather satchel. Behind him stood Mrs. Keene, her face pale and strained. Miss Crow, the man said, his voice flat. My name is Henry Trask. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Victor Willard to collect his child. Eliza forced herself to meet his gaze. The baby's only 2 days old. It's too soon to move. Mr. Willard has hired a wet nurse and a nanny. The child will be well cared for. He held out a piece of paper. This is a court order granting Mr. Willard custody. It's all legal and proper. Legal, Eliza repeated, her voice bitter. Nothing about this is legal. That's not my concern. Now, if you'll hand over the child, no. The word came out sharper than she'd intended. She softened her tone, made herself sound broken. Please, just let me hold him a little longer, a few more minutes. That's all I'm asking. Trask's expression didn't change. You're making this harder than it needs to be. He's my son. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. Please. For a moment she thought he'd refuse, thought he'd simply take the baby by force and be done with it. But something in her face must have touched some long-buried scrap of humanity, because he stepped back and nodded curtly. 5 minutes? Then I'm taking him whether you cooperate or not. He walked out, leaving the door open. Eliza looked down at the baby boy in her arms, this innocent child who had no idea he was part of a terrible deception. I'm sorry, she whispered to him. I'm so sorry. The 5 minutes passed like 5 seconds. Then Trask was back, his patience clearly exhausted. Time's up. Eliza kissed the baby's forehead, a benediction, a prayer, an apology, and handed him over. Trask took the child with surprising gentleness, tucking him into the crook of his arm, He glanced down at the sleeping face, then back at Eliza. Mr. Willard will be informed that the child has been retrieved. You're to stay here until further notice. And if I don't? Then the deal you made is void, and the consequences fall where they may. He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing down the stairs. Eliza sat frozen, listening to the sound of a door closing, of a carriage pulling away, of hoofbeats fading into the distance. Then Mrs. Keene was there, pressing Eliza's daughter back into her arms, and Eliza collapsed into sobs so violent they shook her whole body. "It's done," Mrs. Keene said softly. "You did it. She's safe." But Eliza couldn't answer, could only hold her daughter and cry and pray that the deception would hold long enough for them to disappear. They had maybe a day before Willard discovered the truth. Mrs. Keene moved with swift efficiency, packing supplies, arranging transportation, sending word to the lawyer about what had happened. James Hartford arrived within the hour, his face grim but determined. "The warrant's been delayed another week," he said. "Some Judge Willard bought off is blocking it. But I've sent word to a federal marshal I trust. If we can keep you hidden until he arrives—" "I can't stay," Eliza interrupted. "Not now. Willard will figure out I gave him the wrong baby, and when he does, he'll tear this city apart looking for me." "Then where will you go?" Eliza thought of the ranch, thought of Thomas and Margaret and the life she'd been forced to leave behind. Thought of Rafe, his face, his voice, the way he'd looked at her the last time she'd seen him. "Back to Coultridge," she said. "Back to the people who might still help me." Hartford shook his head. "That's the first place Willard will look." I know, but it's also the only place I have left." She looked down at her daughter, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "And I won't run forever. I won't raise her in hiding, always looking over my shoulder. If I'm going to fight, I need to fight where it matters. You'll need protection, money, resources." "I have something better." Eliza's jaw tightened. "I have the truth, and I have people who care about the truth." Hartford studied her for a long moment. Then he reached into his satchel and pulled out the envelope Catherine Willard had sent. "Take this. All the evidence we've gathered. If something happens to me, if Willard tries to bury this, you make sure it gets to someone who can use it." Eliza took the envelope, her hands shaking. "What about you?" "I'll keep pushing the warrant through, keep the pressure on, and when the time comes, I'll testify." He paused. "Be careful, Miss Crow. Victor Willard is a dangerous man, and desperate men do terrible things. So do desperate women," Eliza said quietly. The journey back to Coultridge took 4 days of hard travel on a public stage, Eliza holding her daughter close and praying the baby wouldn't cry too loudly, wouldn't draw too much attention. She'd wrapped her hair in a scarf, wore a plain dress borrowed from Mrs. Keene, and kept her face turned away from the other passengers. As far as anyone knew, she was just another young widow traveling with her infant, unremarkable and invisible. The stage rolled into Coultridge on a gray afternoon, the sky heavy with the promise of snow. Eliza climbed down on shaking legs, her daughter bundled against her chest, and looked around at the familiar streets with a mixture of relief and dread. She couldn't go to Willard's house, couldn't risk being seen in town. So she hired a horse from the livery, the stable hand didn't recognize her, thank heaven, and rode out toward the Double Star Ranch. Every mile felt like 10. Her body ached from childbirth, from the long journey, from sheer exhaustion. But she kept going, driven by desperation and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she could still salvage something from the wreckage of her life. The ranch appeared as the sun was setting, the buildings dark and quiet against the purple sky. Eliza rode into the yard, dismounted on trembling legs, and stood there, her daughter in her arms, trying to find the courage to knock on the door. Before she could, it opened. Margaret Stockwell stood framed in the lamplight, her face shocked and pale. "Eliza?" "I need help," Eliza said, and her voice broke. "Please, I have nowhere else to go." Margaret didn't hesitate. She pulled Eliza inside, called for Thomas, and within minutes, Eliza was sitting by the fire with a blanket around her shoulders and a cup of tea in her hands while Margaret held the baby and cooed softly. "Where's Rafe?" Eliza asked, her voice barely a whisper. Thomas and Margaret exchanged a look. He left, Thomas said heavily. 2 months ago. Said he had business to settle. We haven't seen him since. Eliza's heart sank. Where did he go? North, up into the mountains. There were rumors, stories about his father, about people who'd worked with Mateo Navarro still operating up there. I think, Thomas hesitated, I think he went looking for answers, or maybe for revenge. Hard to say. He doesn't even know, Eliza whispered. About the baby. About any of it. Then we'll find him, Margaret said firmly. We'll send word, hire riders, do whatever it takes. But first you need to rest. You look half dead. I can't rest. Willard knows I'm gone by now. He'll come looking. Let him come. Thomas's voice was hard. This is my land, and I won't let that bastard take one more thing from us. But even as he said it, Eliza could see the worry in his eyes, because they all knew that when Victor Willard decided to take something, he didn't stop until he had it. The attack came 3 days later. Eliza had just finished feeding the baby when she heard horses, too many horses, moving too fast. She ran to the window and saw them coming up the valley road, maybe a dozen riders, led by a man in a black coat. Victor Willard. Margaret! Eliza's voice was sharp with fear. He's here! Margaret grabbed the shotgun from above the mantel. Thomas was already outside, standing on the porch with his rifle. The ranch hands were emerging from the bunkhouse, armed and ready. The riders pulled up in the yard, their horses snorting and stamping. Willard dismounted, his face a mask of cold fury. Thomas Stockwell, he called out. I'm here for what's mine. You're on my land, Thomas said evenly, and you're not welcome. I have a legal right to my child. Hand her over, and I'll leave peacefully. That child isn't yours, and you know it. Willard's smile was thin and sharp. I have a court order that says otherwise, and a dozen men who'll enforce it. Inside the house, Eliza clutched her daughter to her chest, her mind racing. She couldn't let Willard take her, couldn't let this happen, but she also couldn't let Thomas and Margaret die defending her. She made a decision. She walked out onto the porch, the baby in her arms, and faced Victor Willard for the first time since she'd fled Denver. You want the truth? She called out, her voice ringing across the yard. You want everyone to know what kind of man you are? Willard's expression didn't change. Careful, Eliza. You're in no position to make threats. I have evidence, documents, bank records, testimony from the men you've bribed and blackmailed. Everything you've done, the land fraud, the murders, the lies. I have it all. And if you take one step closer, I'll make sure every newspaper in the territory gets a copy. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Willard's face. You're bluffing. Am I? She pulled the envelope from her dress, held it up. This is everything Catherine gave me, everything James Hartford compiled. You know what's in here. You know what it'll do to you. Catherine. The name came out like a curse. That vindictive bitch. She's braver than you'll ever be. Willard's hand moved toward the gun at his hip. Every rifle on the porch swung toward him. Don't, Thomas said quietly. You won't make it 2 steps. The yard was silent, tense, balanced on the edge of violence. Then from the road behind Willard's men, a voice rang out. Federal Marshal, drop your weapons. Everyone turned. A group of riders was approaching, badges gleaming on their chests, rifles at the ready. At their head was a man Eliza recognized from Denver, the Federal Marshal James Hartford had contacted. And beside him, on a dust-covered horse, his face harder and leaner than she remembered but unmistakably him, was Rafe Navarro. Eliza's breath caught. Rafe's eyes found hers across the yard, and for a moment the world fell away. Then he was dismounting, striding forward, his gaze never leaving her face. Rafe, she whispered. He stopped a few feet away, taking in her appearance. Thinner, exhausted, her dress stained from travel. And then his gaze dropped to the bundle in her arms. His expression cracked. Is that yours? Eliza said, tears streaming down her face. Ours. Her name. I haven't named her yet. I was waiting. I wanted you to... She couldn't finish. Rafe closed the distance between them, his arms wrapping around her and the baby, holding them both like he was afraid they'd disappear. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I should have... "You're here now," Eliza said. "That's all that matters." Behind them, the federal marshal was reading charges, snapping handcuffs on Victor Willard's wrists. Willard was shouting something about lawyers and false accusations, but no one was listening. The battle was over, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Eliza could breathe. The full story came out in pieces over the following days. Rafe had gone north looking for men who'd known his father, hoping to find some way to clear the Navarro name, to prove that Mateo had been more than just a bandit. What he'd found instead were ledgers, detailed records his father had kept of the men who'd hired him, the jobs he'd done, the money that had changed hands. And at the center of it all was a name that appeared again and again: Victor Willard. Willard had used Mateo Navarro as a weapon, hiring him to intimidate rivals, destroy evidence, even kill when necessary. And when Mateo had become a liability, Willard had been the one to turn him in, to make sure he hanged, to bury the connection forever. Rafe had brought the ledgers to James Hartford, who'd combined them with Catherine's evidence to build an unshakable case. The federal marshal had issued the warrant, gathered his men, and ridden straight for Coultridge. They'd arrived just in time. Willard was taken to Denver in chains. The trial lasted 3 weeks and ended with a guilty verdict on 14 counts, ranging from fraud to conspiracy to murder. He was sentenced to 20 years in a federal prison. Catherine Willard filed for divorce the same day, and the loan against the Double Star Ranch was declared void, the paperwork revealed to be fraudulent from the start. Thomas and Margaret were safe. The ranch was safe. But for Eliza, the real victory was smaller and quieter. It was Rafe sitting beside her on the porch at dusk, their daughter sleeping in his arms while he hummed a tune his mother had taught him. It was the way he looked at her, not with pity or judgment, but with love and wonder and fierce protection. "What do you want to name her?" he asked one evening. Eliza thought about it. Thought about her mother, about Catherine, about all the women who'd fought and sacrificed and survived. "Hope," she said finally. "I want to name her Hope." Rafe smiled. "Hope Navarro. I like it." "Hope Crow Navarro," Eliza corrected. "She should carry both our names, both our stories." "Both our stories," Rafe repeated softly. He looked down at the baby, then back at Eliza. "Will you marry me? I know it's fast. I know we've been through hell, but I don't want to waste another day pretending I can live without you." Eliza's throat tightened. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." They were wed a week later in the ranch house, with Thomas and Margaret as witnesses and Hope sleeping peacefully in a basket at their feet. There was no church, no fancy dress, no crowd of guests, just two people who'd found each other in the darkness and decided to build something better in the light. But even as Eliza stood beside Rafe, speaking vows that felt sacred despite the absence of any minister, a shadow moved at the edge of her awareness. Because Clara Bennett, the woman who'd loaned her baby boy for that terrible deception, had disappeared. Mrs. Keene had sent word. Clara had taken the money Eliza had given her and vanished, leaving Denver without a trace. And with her, she'd taken a secret that could still destroy everything. She knew which baby had been swapped. She knew the truth. And somewhere out there, Victor Willard's supposed son, the boy who'd been handed over to his men and raised as an heir, was living a lie. Eliza tried to push the thought away, tried to tell herself it didn't matter, that the boy would be fine, that she'd done what she had to do to survive. But late at night, when Rafe was asleep and Hope was quiet in her cradle, Eliza would lie awake and wonder, what kind of man would that boy become, raised by Willard's hired hands, taught to believe he was the son of a monster? And what would happen if he ever learned the truth? The questions haunted her, but she buried them deep, locked them away, and focused on the life she was building, the life she'd fought so hard to claim. Because some truths, she told herself, were better left buried, even if they had a way of clawing back to the surface when you least expected it. Spring came again, painting the valley in shades of green and gold. Eliza planted a garden behind the ranch house, vegetables and flowers mixed together in wild, joyful abundance. She learned to can and preserve, to sew dresses for Hope, to ride out with Rafe to check the fences and move the cattle. She became part of the ranch in a way she'd never been before, not as a servant, but as family. Hope grew from a tiny, fragile newborn into a sturdy, curious infant who laughed at everything and grabbed at the world with fearless hands. She had Rafe's eyes, and Eliza's stubborn chin, and watching her discover the world, the horses, the chickens, the way sunlight moved across the floor, filled Eliza with a happiness so intense it sometimes hurt. Margaret taught her how to make bread, how to read the weather, how to shoot straight. Thomas showed her the business side of ranching, how to keep books, negotiate prices, manage hands. They treated her not as a charity case but as a daughter, and Eliza loved them fiercely for it. And Rafe was everything she'd hoped for and more. Patient when she woke screaming from nightmares about Willard, strong when she felt weak, gentle when she needed gentleness, and fierce when she needed protection. He was a good father, a better husband, and the kind of man who made her believe that maybe, just maybe, they could outrun the past. But the past, as always, had other plans. Set. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in late May. Eliza was hanging laundry when Thomas called her inside, his face grave. He handed her an envelope, the paper expensive, the handwriting elegant. It was from Catherine Willard. Eliza opened it with trembling hands. Dear Eliza, I hope this letter finds you well and happy. I've heard through my lawyers that you've married and are living at the Double Star Ranch. I'm glad. You deserve peace after everything you've endured. I'm writing because there's something you need to know. Victor died in prison 2 weeks ago. Officially, it was pneumonia. Unofficially, there are rumors of poison, of a rival settling old scores. Either way, he's gone. But his estate remains, and with it, his supposed son. The boy you know is not his. The child has been placed with a family in San Francisco, wealthy people who believe they're raising Victor Willard's heir. They know nothing of the deception. I'm telling you this because you have a choice to make. You can let the lie stand. Let that boy grow up believing he's someone he's not. Or you can tell the truth, claim him as the child you swapped, and face whatever consequences follow. I can't tell you what to do. But I can tell you this. Secrets have a way of destroying the people who keep them. I know. I've lived with Victor's secrets for 20 years, and they've hollowed me out until there's almost nothing left. Whatever you decide, know that I support you, and know that you're braver than I ever was. With respect and affection, Catherine Willard. Eliza read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and set it on the table. Rafe came in from the barn, took one look at her face, and said, "What is it?" She told him everything. About the swap, about Clara Bennett, about the boy living in San Francisco under a false name. When she finished, Rafe was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" "I don't know." Eliza's voice was barely a whisper. "If I tell the truth, that boy loses everything. His family, his name, his future. And Clara Bennett might come forward, might accuse us of kidnapping, or worse. We could lose hope. We could lose everything. And if you don't tell the truth, then I live the rest of my life knowing I stole someone else's child and let him grow up believing a lie." Rafe reached across the table, took her hand. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. We face it together." Eliza looked out the window at the valley, at the mountains rising strong and eternal, at hope playing in the grass under Margaret's watchful eye. She'd fought so hard to get here, to build this life, to find this peace. Could she risk it all for the sake of a truth that might destroy more than it saved? Or was the greater sin letting an innocent child live a lie? She didn't know. And the not knowing felt like drowning. But one thing was certain, the choice was coming. And when it did, she'd have to be ready to face whatever consequences followed. Because that's what survivors did. They faced the hard truths. They made the impossible choices. They carried the weight of their decisions and kept moving forward. Even when the road ahead was dark and uncertain. Even when the cost was almost too high to bear. Eliza didn't sleep that night. She lay beside Rafe in the darkness, listening to his steady breathing, feeling the weight of Catherine's letter like a stone on her chest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw two faces. Hope's, perfect and trusting, and the face of a boy she'd never met, growing up under a stolen name in a city far away. By dawn, she'd made her decision. She found Rafe in the barn, mucking out stalls with the kind of methodical focus he used when his mind was troubled. He looked up as she approached, his eyes searching her face. "I have to go to San Francisco," she said without preamble. "I have to see him, the boy. I have to know who he is, what kind of life he has. And then," she swallowed hard, "then I'll decide what to do." Rafe set down his pitchfork, wiped his hands on his jeans. When do we leave? We? You think I'm letting you do this alone? His voice was gentle but firm. Whatever happens, we face it together. That's what we promised. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. What about Hope? What about the ranch? Margaret and Thomas will watch Hope. They've been doing it since she was born anyway. He stepped closer, cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. And the ranch will still be here when we get back. But you won't have peace until you do this. I can see it eating at you. I'm scared, she whispered. What if I'm making the wrong choice? What if telling the truth destroys everything? Then we'll rebuild. We've done it before. He kissed her forehead. But living with a secret like this? That'll destroy you from the inside out. I watched my father carry secrets until they killed him. I won't watch you do the same. So they made the arrangements. Margaret agreed to care for Hope, though her eyes were worried. Thomas gave them money for the journey and the name of a business associate in San Francisco who might help them navigate the city. And 3 days later, Eliza and Rafe were on a westbound train, watching the mountains give way to rolling hills and then to the vast expanse of the Pacific. San Francisco was overwhelming in a way Denver had never been. The city rose from the hills like something out of a fever dream, houses painted in wild colors, streets so steep they seemed to defy gravity, cable cars clanging through intersections packed with people from every corner of the world. The air smelled of salt water and coal smoke and something indefinably foreign. Eliza clutched Rafe's arm as they navigated the crowded streets, feeling small and lost. They found lodging in a modest boarding house near the waterfront, a place that catered to working people and didn't ask too many questions. The landlady was a Chinese woman named Mrs. Chen, who spoke broken English but had kind eyes and clean rooms. That first night, Eliza sat by the window and stared out at the lights of the city, feeling the distance between herself and Hope like a physical ache. Rafe sat beside her, his hand covering hers. We'll find him tomorrow, he said, and then we'll know what we're dealing with. But finding the boy proved harder than they'd anticipated. Catherine's letter had mentioned the family's name, the Harrisons, wealthy shipping merchants who lived in Nob Hill, but not their exact address. Rafe spent 2 days asking questions, greasing palms, following leads through the city's tangled social hierarchy. Finally, a clerk at the port office gave them what they needed. The Harrison mansion stood on California Street, a 3-story Victorian painted cream and gold, with a garden that took up half the block. Eliza stood across the street, staring at the house, her heart in her throat. Somewhere inside those walls was the boy she'd traded for her daughter's safety. The child who'd been raised as Victor Willard's son, who'd been given to this family when Willard died, who had no idea his entire life was built on a lie. What now? Rafe asked quietly. I don't know. Eliza watched as a carriage pulled up to the house, disgorging a well-dressed woman and a small boy who couldn't have been more than a year old. The woman, Mrs. Harrison presumably, held the boy's hand as they climbed the steps, her posture proud and protective. The boy looked healthy, happy, loved. Eliza's chest tightened. We should go. This was a mistake. No. Rafe gripped her arm gently. You came all this way. You need to see this through. And say what? Excuse me, but that's not actually your child. He's the son of a dead widow from Denver, and I swapped him for my daughter to escape a monster? They'll have us arrested. Maybe. Or maybe they'll understand. Rafe turned her to face him. But you'll never know unless you try. And if you walk away now, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering. He was right. She hated that he was right, but he was. Eliza took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and crossed the street. A butler answered the door, a severe man in formal livery who looked at their dusty traveling clothes with barely concealed disdain. May I help you? I need to speak with Mrs. Harrison. It's about her son. His expression grew even colder. Mrs. Harrison does not receive unannounced visitors. If you have business, you may submit a written request. Please, Eliza's voice cracked. It's urgent. It's about where the boy came from, about Victor Willard. Something flickered in the butler's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or curiosity. Wait here. He closed the door. Eliza and Rafe stood on the step, the fog rolling in from the bay, wrapping the city in gray. 5 minutes passed. 10. Eliza was about to give up when the door opened again. The butler stepped aside. "Mrs. Harrison will see you, briefly." They were led through a house that made Willard's mansion look modest. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, paintings in gilded frames. Everything spoke of old money, of respectability earned through generations of careful accumulation. The butler showed them into a parlor decorated in shades of blue and silver, then disappeared. A moment later, the woman from the carriage entered. She was in her late 30s, elegant in a way that came from breeding rather than effort, with auburn hair pinned up and eyes the color of steel. "I'm Elizabeth Harrison," she said, her voice cool and measured. "My butler says you have information about my son." Eliza forced herself to meet the woman's gaze. "Yes, ma'am. My name is Eliza Navarro. This is my husband, Rafe. And I need to tell you something that's going to sound impossible." Mrs. Harrison's expression didn't change. "I'm listening." So Eliza told her. Everything. From the moment she'd arrived at Mrs. Garvin's boarding house to the deal with Willard to the pregnancy and the birth and the terrible choice she'd made in that Denver boarding house. She left nothing out. Not the swap, not Clara Bennett, not the fact that the boy Mrs. Harrison was raising as her son was actually the child of a desperate widow who'd needed him for an hour to save her own daughter's life. When she finished, the room was silent, except for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Mrs. Harrison sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, her face unreadable. Finally, she said, "Do you have any proof of this?" Eliza pulled out the documents James Hartford had given her, the records of Willard's dealings, the court orders, the testimony from Mrs. Keene and the midwife. She laid them on the table between them. Mrs. Harrison picked up the papers, read them carefully, her expression growing tighter with each page. When she finished, she set them down and looked at Eliza with something that might have been fury or might have been despair. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice low and controlled. "What do you want?" "The truth," Eliza said simply. "I want to know who he is, who his real mother is. And I want to give you the choice I never had, to know the truth and decide what to do with it." "The truth," Mrs. Harrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The truth is that my husband and I tried for 10 years to have a child, 10 years of prayers and doctors and disappointment. And then Victor Willard's lawyer contacted us, said there was a boy who needed a home, an orphan with good bloodlines who deserved better than the streets. We didn't ask questions. We didn't want to know. We wanted a son." "And now you have one," Eliza said gently. "A son who loves you, who knows you as his mother. Nothing I've told you changes that." "Doesn't it?" Mrs. Harrison's voice broke. "Everything I've built with him is based on a lie. How can I look at him now and not see that?" "Because he's still the same boy he was yesterday. The same child you've loved and raised. The only thing that's changed is that you know the truth about where he came from." Eliza leaned forward. "And maybe that truth can set you free. Set all of us free." "Free." Mrs. Harrison stood abruptly, walked to the window. For a long moment she stared out at the garden, her shoulders rigid. Then she said, "What about his real mother? This Clara Bennett. Where is she?" "I don't know. She disappeared after it happened." "So she abandoned him. She was desperate, alone. I don't think she had a choice." Mrs. Harrison turned back to face her. "And what about you? What do you want out of this? Money? A share of his inheritance? Some kind of acknowledgement?" "I want nothing," Eliza said firmly. "I just wanted you to know the truth. What you do with it is your decision." "My decision?" Mrs. Harrison's laugh was bitter. "You've just told me my entire life is a fabrication, and you expect me to make a rational decision? I expect you to do what's best for that boy, because that's what mothers do." Eliza stood, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "And I think you're a good mother, Mrs. Harrison. I can see it in the way you held his hand on the steps, the way you looked at him. He's lucky to have you, luckier than he would have been if Willard had kept him." Mrs. Harrison's composure cracked. She sank into a chair, her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Rafe stepped forward, his voice gentle. "We'll go now. We've said what we came to say. But if you need anything, if you want to find Clara Bennett, If you want to know more about what happened, we'll help however we can." Mrs. Harrison didn't answer, just sat there, crying, the weight of the truth crushing her. Eliza and Rafe left quietly, the butler showing them out with an expression that suggested he'd heard every word and didn't know what to make of it. They walked back to the boarding house in silence, the fog thickening around them, muffling the sounds of the city. When they reached their room, Eliza collapsed onto the bed, exhausted and hollowed out. "Did I do the right thing?" she asked the ceiling. Rafe lay down beside her, pulled her close. "You told the truth. That's all any of us can do." "But what if it destroys her? What if she can't look at that boy the same way anymore? Then she'll learn to see him differently. But he'll still be her son. Love doesn't disappear just because the foundation shifts." Eliza hoped he was right, but hope felt fragile and insubstantial, like fog that might burn off with the morning sun. They stayed in San Francisco for 3 more days, waiting to see if Mrs. Harrison would respond, would reach out, would demand something more. But there was only silence. On the 4th day, as they were packing to leave, a messenger arrived at the boarding house with a letter. Eliza opened it with trembling hands. "Mrs. Navarro, I have spent the past 3 days wrestling with what you told me. I have been angry, heartbroken, and more lost than I have ever been in my life. But I have also watched my son, and yes, he is my son, regardless of blood, and I have seen that he is happy, healthy, and loved. I have decided that the truth, while painful, does not need to be weaponized. I will not tell him about his origins, at least not until he is old enough to understand. I will not seek out Clara Bennett, though I pray she has found some measure of peace, and I will not hold you accountable for the choice you made in an impossible situation. Instead, I will raise him with love and honesty in all the ways that matter. I will teach him to value truth, to protect the vulnerable, and to understand that sometimes the greatest act of love is sacrifice. I don't know if I will ever fully forgive Victor Willard for the web of lies he spun, or myself for being caught in it. But I do know this. You gave me the gift of truth when you could have stayed silent. That took tremendous courage. I wish you and your family peace and happiness, and I hope that someday, when the wounds have healed, we might meet again under better circumstances. With gratitude and respect, Elizabeth Harrison. P.S. I have also taken the liberty of contacting my lawyer about Clara Bennett. If she can be found, I will ensure she knows her son is well cared for and that she has no cause to fear retribution. Perhaps that knowledge will give her some peace. Eliza read the letter twice, then handed it to Rafe. He read it silently, then folded it carefully and gave it back. "You did the right thing," he said, and for the first time since receiving Catherine's letter, Eliza felt the weight begin to lift. The journey back to Coldridge felt different from the journey out. The landscape was the same, mountains and plains and endless sky, but Eliza felt lighter, as if she'd set down a burden she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. When they finally reached the ranch, Hope came toddling across the yard on unsteady legs, shrieking with delight, and Eliza scooped her up and held her so tight the baby squirmed in protest. Margaret and Thomas stood on the porch, their faces relieved and curious. That night, after Hope was asleep, Eliza told them everything that had happened in San Francisco. When she finished, Margaret reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You did a brave thing," she said, "and a good thing." "I'm not sure it was good," Eliza said, "but it was honest." "That's what matters," Thomas said. "The world's got enough lies. It needs more people willing to speak the truth, even when it costs them." Summer turned to fall, and fall to winter. The ranch settled into its rhythm, planting and harvesting, births and deaths, the endless cycle of work that defined frontier life. Hope grew from a toddler into a curious, fearless little girl who climbed everything, asked endless questions, and had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. Eliza threw herself into ranch life with renewed purpose. She started a small school for the children of ranch hands and neighboring homesteads, teaching them to read and write and do sums. She wrote letters to Catherine Willard, who had moved to Boston and was rebuilding her life far from the shadow of her late husband. She even wrote to James Hartford, thanking him for everything he'd done and asking him to keep her updated on Clara Bennett if she was ever found. And she built a life with Rafe that felt solid and real and earned. They had hard days, Days when money was tight, or the weather destroyed a season's work, or Hope came down with a fever that had them both terrified. But they also had good days. Days when the valley was so beautiful it hurt to look at. When Hope laughed so hard she got the hiccups. When Rafe would pull Eliza into his arms and dance her around the kitchen to no music but the sound of their own breathing. They had survived. And more than that, they were building something that couldn't be taken away. Not by powerful men, not by lies, not by the weight of the past. Then, on a crisp October morning 2 years after their trip to San Francisco, a letter arrived. It was from Elizabeth Harrison. Dear Eliza, I hope this letter finds you and your family well. I am writing with news that I think will interest you. My lawyer succeeded in locating Clara Bennett. She was living in a small town in Oregon, working as a seamstress under a different name. When my lawyer approached her and explained that her son was safe and well cared for, she broke down in tears. She said she had lived every day with the guilt of what she'd done, even though she knew she'd had no choice. I invited her to San Francisco to meet him, not as his mother, but as a distant relative who had known his birth parents. She agreed. The meeting was difficult for both of us, but also healing. She was able to see that he is loved and happy, and I was able to thank her for the sacrifice she made, even if she doesn't fully understand it. She asked about you. I told her what you did, how you swapped the babies to save your daughter, and how you came all the way to San Francisco to tell me the truth. She wept. She said to tell you that she forgives you and that she's grateful you kept your daughter safe. I thought you should know. The circle is closed now. All the mothers involved, you, me, and Clara, know the truth and have made peace with it. The boy is thriving, and your daughter, I trust, is doing the same. May we all find continued healing and happiness. With warmth, Elizabeth Eliza read the letter 3 times, then walked out to the creek where she and Rafe had first kissed. She sat on the bank, the water rushing past her feet, and let herself cry, not from sadness, but from relief so profound it felt like grace. The weight was gone. The secret was no longer hers alone to carry, and everyone had chosen forgiveness over vengeance, truth over comfortable lies. When Rafe found her an hour later, she was still sitting there, the letter clutched in her hand, her face peaceful. You all right? He asked, settling beside her. Yeah. She leaned against him, his arm coming around her shoulders. I really am, Bob. The years passed the way years do on a ranch, marked by seasons and storms, by calves born and cattle sold, by children growing and adults aging. Hope grew into a bright, spirited girl who loved horses and books in equal measure, who asked questions that made the adults around her think harder, who had her mother's stubborn strength and her father's quiet loyalty. Eliza and Rafe added to their family, a son they named Thomas, after the man who'd given them sanctuary when they had nowhere else to go, and then twin girls who kept everyone on their toes. The ranch house that had once felt too big became full of life and laughter and the controlled chaos of raising children on the frontier. Margaret and Thomas grew older but no less vital, passing on their knowledge, and eventually, when Thomas's health began to fail, the ranch itself. Rafe took over the management with Eliza at his side, partners in every sense of the word. And through it all, Eliza held on to the lessons she'd learned in the hardest years of her life. That survival sometimes meant making impossible choices. That the truth was worth fighting for, even when it hurt. That family wasn't just blood, but the people who stood by you when the world fell apart. That second chances were real, if you were brave enough to reach for them. She thought about Victor Willard sometimes, dead in a prison cell, his empire dismantled, his name synonymous with corruption and greed. She wondered if he'd had any regrets in those final moments, if he'd understood that power built on lies always crumbled in the end. She thought about Clara Bennett, sewing dresses in Oregon, carrying the knowledge that her son was safe but forever beyond her reach. She thought about Elizabeth Harrison, raising a boy who would never know his true origins but would grow up loved and whole. And she thought about Catherine Willard, who'd risked everything to help a desperate girl she barely knew, who'd finally found the courage to escape her own prison. All these women, connected by tragedy and secrets, by the choices they'd made and the prices they'd paid, all of them survivors, all of them stronger than the world had given them credit for. On Hope's 10th birthday, Eliza took her daughter on a ride up into the hills above the ranch. They stopped at a place where you could see the whole valley spread out below. The ranch buildings, the river snaking through the grassland, the mountains rising eternal in the distance. "Mama, why did you bring me up here?" Hope asked, her legs dangling from the horse's back. Eliza looked at her daughter, so fierce and bright and free, and felt her heart swell. "Because I wanted you to see how far we've come, and I wanted to tell you something important." "What?" "Life is going to be hard sometimes. People are going to try to tell you who you are, what you're worth, what you're allowed to want. And some of those people will have power over you, money, authority, strength." Eliza paused, choosing her words carefully. "But you get to decide who you become, not them, you. And as long as you hold on to the truth, as long as you fight for what's right, even when it's terrifying, you'll find your way through." Hope considered this, her young face serious. "Is that what you did, Mama?" "Yes, sweetheart, that's what I did." "And you're happy now?" Eliza looked out at the valley, at the life she'd built from ashes and determination and love. "Yes," she said, "I'm happy now." Hope nodded, satisfied, and kicked her horse into a trot. "Race you back to the house." And as Eliza watched her daughter ride fearlessly down the hill, her laughter echoing across the valley, she knew that every sacrifice, every terrible choice, every moment of fear and pain had been worth it. Because Hope was free. Free from Willard's shadow, from the weight of lies, from the suffocating expectations of a world that wanted to own her. She was free to be exactly who she was meant to be. And that, Eliza thought as she urged her own horse forward, was the greatest victory of all. Years later, when Eliza was an old woman with silver in her hair and grandchildren playing at her feet, she would tell them stories about the old days, about how the frontier had been wild and hard and beautiful, about how people could survive things they never thought possible, about how love, real love, the kind built on honesty and mutual respect, could heal wounds the world said were fatal. But she never told them about Victor Willard, never spoke of the months she'd spent in captivity, of the deals she'd made, of the baby she'd swapped to save her daughter's life. Some stories, she'd decided, were hers alone to carry. Instead, she told them about a ranch in a valley where the grass grew green and the mountains stood eternal. She told them about a man named Rafe Navarro who'd taught her that the past didn't have to define the future. She told them about a woman named Margaret who'd shown her what family really meant. And she told them to be brave, to speak truth, to fight for the people they loved. Because in the end, that was all that mattered. Not gold, not power, not the empire Victor Willard had tried to build on the backs of desperate people. Just love, and the courage to protect it. The sun set over the Double Star Ranch, painting the valley in shades of amber and rose. Eliza sat on the porch with Rafe beside her, their hands intertwined, watching their great-grandchildren chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "We did all right," Rafe said quietly. Eliza smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Yeah, we did." And in the soft twilight of a life well lived, surrounded by the family they'd fought so hard to protect, Eliza Crow Navarro finally, truly rested. The battles were over, the secrets were buried, the truth had set them free, and they had won.